Okay, so you may not know it, but I have a special guest in the room, but she refuses to be a part of the video. So just know that, one of my editors is here as I'm going through this. There she is. See, she's here. All right, so Spanish-American War, only 4 months long. And everyone always gets confused because wars like go from year to year. Nope, this is all in 1898 and it's only 4 months long. John Hay is going to call it a splendid little war because we literally have very, very little fighting and we get so much from it. Now, do we get it fairly? No, because it's an imperialist war. Something to remember, the Mexican-American War is going to be caused by Manifest Destiny, MM. The Spanish-American War, SP, is caused because we're looking for these spheres of influence, SP, okay? So good way to keep those straight because, as you guys know, people often mix up the Spanish-American War and the Mexican-American War, but this is the imperialist one. Again, it's 1898. So how does this start? We know we have imperialist fever. This video is literally picking up where the last one dropped off about the Great White Fleet. We know that we're going to Hawaii. We're checking things out. We're getting in the game like the rest of Europe. And we have such low-hanging fruit all around us because Spain is a weakened empire. Spain is old. We know that it's been a steady downhill since the Armada. And there's all these Spanish holdings surrounding us in Latin America and in the Caribbean. So how easy, because they're so close to us, and to take it from Spain is a bit like stealing candy from a baby because we have these huge imperialized ships that are really industrialized and strong, and we have a huge navy. They do not. They do not. So it's going to be a little too easy for us. And the way we deal with the people who live in these areas is, of course, going to be less than morally correct. So let's look at what's going on in Cuba. Cuba and lots of these areas, the Philippines, etc., they've been wanting to get their independence from Spain. So Cuba has been pushing for this, and they've been revolting under Spanish rule. They want to be independent. Jose Marti is going to be the leader of this resistance. The Spanish government is going to exile him. More people are encouraged to then, in the wake of his exile, rebel against Spain. So you're going to see that Marti actually dies for the cause when he returns to Cuba to fight for them. When that happens, instant martyr status. And you see more and more Cubans get thrown into jail, more inspired. And the conditions in the jail are quite horrendous that the Spanish are, putting them in. 1/3 of prisoners die from starvation. They die from disease. Why are we interested? And of course, when push comes to shove, we can say democracy, we can say it's not fair, we can say we'll help you be independent. We wouldn't be anywhere near this situation if we were not interested in Cuba's raw materials. And that, of course, in Cuba is going to be sugarcane, right? Which is always going to be the case in the Caribbean. So we insert ourselves and we say that it's about giving them democracy and etc. The reality is they're a really close, valuable coaling station, as in where we would get that coal, fuel up, etc. with our ships. They're so close to us. And two, our thinking is if we don't take it, someone else will. And they're very, very close to us. Cuba is like literally stone's throw from Florida. Okay, that's exaggerating, but it's really close. It's really, really close. So we want it. So how do we get involved? How do we have people know about this? Yellow journalism. And you and I will talk about this more in class. But yellow journalism is a type of journalism where it's sensationalized. They want to sell papers. So you will see those headlines in stores. It's like, so for instance, Jennifer Aniston just broke up with her guy. I don't know his name. But, there could be a magazine saying that, or it could be like Jennifer Aniston running down the street in tears with an alien chasing her because she broke up with Justin what's-his-face. Do you know what I mean? And you would be more inclined to look at that headline and say, and more inclined to buy the paper because it's been so sensationalized from the original story. That's what yellow journalism is going to do. And it's so odd to think about because at this time we have muckrakers who are doing such good work. Nellie Bly, Jacob Riis, undercovering that, muck of society, showing people the wrongs on a really good moral standpoint as far as what they're doing. And then you have this yellow journalism, which is just like this dirty, low slung, let's sell as many papers as possible, fabricate stories. And you have to make stories appealing so people buy them, but you have to be careful with the facts. And you and I know that today with fake news thrown around like a phrase constantly, the importance of this. And yellow journalists at the time are not going to do this. They're going to shock, they're going to sensationalize, they're going to have highly exaggerated stories to sell those papers. And what sells a ton of papers? War sells a ton of papers. So you're going to see these guys actually want us to go to war because it's going to sell them a ton. And the two main people we're talking about are William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer. Now, Hearst today, lots of people say what the movie Citizen Kane is based on, a film great. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. lots of people read magazines today, Cosmopolitan, 17, Redbook, etc., Marie Claire, all Hearst publications still today. Hearst and Condé Nast are two really big publication groups today. And then there's Joseph Pulitzer, and he owns the New York World. Now, ironically, the Pulitzer Prize is named after him for literature. So these guys have tons of money. We're going to look at pictures in class of William Randolph's Hearst Castle in California. You can still go. The swimming pool looks like something that is out of ancient Greece. It's ridiculous. And these guys really want war. How much they completely push this are responsible, up for, discussion. But Hearst supposedly says to a political cartoonist he sends to Cuba, when the political cartoonist is like, there's not a lot here, I don't have a lot to report on. He says, you supply the pictures, I'll supply the war. That's the urban legend of his quote. So these guys instigate this war. They inflame the conditions in Cuba. They want people to care about it, talk about it, buy their papers. And again, the more sensationalist it is, the more papers that are sold. So now everyone's like, oh my gosh, what about what's going on in Cuba? Everyone's obsessed. When there's so many other big things going on they could be reporting on, like maybe lynching in the South or something like that. No, because they want a war, they want to sensationalize that. And then how convenient we intercept a letter. A letter written by a Spanish delegate is going to be all about how, oh, McKinley's such a wuss, he'll never fight us, he'll never go to war. It falls in the hands of a Cuban spy who sells the paper to Hearst. Now think about that for a second. Lots of things could be going down here. Did Hearst himself just make this up? Did the Cuban spy make it up? Or is it true? Who knows? There's lots of stories of speculation like that in the Spanish-American War. It's widely published. Americans are completely outraged about it. And you see a clamoring for war continue and continue. And then in this context of the yellow journalism, of the DeLome letter, of all this stuff, an American battleship called the USS Maine is harbored in Havana. And in Havana, at the harbor, it explodes. And it kills 260 American sailors. And after this, the big rallying cry, of course, is remember the Maine. You got it. So what actually happens here, right? Clearly, everyone blames Spain at the time. We have to go to war with Spain. Let's get vengeance, all of this. But so many things could have happened. First of all, lots of historians point out the ship was really old. And maybe there was something wrong with the ship that just did cause this fire and then this explosion. Second of all, could it have been Cuba? Interesting, if they wanted us to be on their side. And then that darkest, most dastardly part of your brain, just go there for a moment. Could it have been the United States? I know that's like complete blasphemy, but stranger things have happened, right? And would we do something like this to get involved in a war where we could win so much? I don't know, just all things to think about. So this is a war that's fought in two fronts, one in the Philippines and two in Cuba. So again, only 4 months long. And in the Philippines, Teddy Roosevelt, our Secretary of the Navy, is going to give orders to Commodore George Dewey to be ready with our Navy to fight in the Philippines. Now, our Navy is going to be a feather in our cap because this is really strong and this is going to really help us in any battle we take on, more so than fighting on land. So fighting on the sea is actually preferable for us. So his super modern steel ships are going to attack Manila Bay, which is the main bay in the Philippines. And there's a crazy story, which again has probably grown bigger over time, but supposedly they ran out of ammunition and Dewey didn't want to freak his men out, so he tells them to go below deck for breakfast. And these men are like, what? We're fighting a battle. What's happening here? You want us to go eat breakfast? And he's like, go below deck for breakfast. Because he didn't want to freak them out and say we ran out of ammunition because then he'll lose their trust and the battle could be lost, etc. Then they get the ammunition. Then he's like, okay, breakfast is over. And they win this battle. And we team up with a guy whose name is Emilio Aguinaldo. And Emilio Aguinaldo is going to be a Filipino nationalist. He wants democracy for his country. In this moment, we say, oh, yeah, we're going to help you do that. We're going to help you get independent. Later on, when Spain is out, we change our tune. And it's a tune we've really had all along, because to pass up the raw materials from the Philippines once they are independent, not something we're going to do. The Philippines is going to surrender August 14th of 1898. And then that leaves Cuba. So Cuba, right before declaring the war, we are going to issue something called the Teller Amendment. And it's a bit like a prenup, actually. The Teller Amendment is going to say, once Cuba's free from Spanish rule, once we do this thing together and the United States fights with Cuba to make sure Spain is out, you cannot, take over our island. We will be in control of ourselves. And it says that, quote, they'll leave the government and the control of the island to its people. Remember that, because again, are we going to pass up Cuba as a coaling station with that sugar so close to us right there and just be like, oh, sure, honey, you're free, go ahead? No, We're not going to. We're going to change our tune. We're going to be very dishonest, and we're going to write over the Teller Amendment once the war is over. So keep that in mind. Fighting in the Cuba is tough. Fighting in Cuba, first of all, is going to have lots of yellow fever. Yellow fever from these mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are attracted to standing water. There's tons of it in Cuba. This is going to be a big problem. We have really old supplies. Some of our supplies are even from the Civil War. There's like this disgusting canned meat. They're given wool uniforms. It's bad. It's bad. We have no idea how to fight in tropical weather. However, there are really famous volunteer corps. One of them is the Rough Riders. We said that's Teddy Roosevelt and a bunch of these guys who were like boxers, athletes, ranchers, miners, all these different guys who are going to, again, make the war seem really romantic, really adventurous to a lot of these people. Ooh, the Rough Riders, right? And then we talked about the Buffalo Soldiers in class. When we listened to that Bob Marley song, of course, I won't sing it for you, but you know which one it is, right? And these African American soldiers are the 9th and 10th Cavalry. And these groups are instrumental in winning the Battle of San Juan Hill. So when that happens, July 3rd, we are going to sink the Spanish Navy off the coast of Cuba. And pretty soon afterwards, Spain is going to surrender Cuba and Puerto Rico. So again, John Hay calls this a splendid little war, but in reality, it has some enormous consequences. This cost a lot of money. This cost $250 million. Today, that's roughly $7 to $8 billion. That's a lot of money. 2,000 American soldiers are dead, most of them from yellow fever. Like the Civil War, most men in this war are going to die from disease. We are going to get Guam and we are going to get Puerto Rico, but we pay $20 million for this. And we also get the Philippines. We're going to talk about how clearly Emilio Aguinaldo and these guys are not thrilled with how this all went down, and they're going to push back. Spain gives up their claims to Cuba completely. And again, when we look at these areas, when we look at, for instance, what just happened in Puerto Rico, and our responsibility or not as the territory, what does that really mean if you're not a state and you're a territory? We're continuing to try and figure out how to support, where to support these places that are territories, leftovers from this time of imperialism. And usually you see a lot of severe political unrest, social issues today in these nations, in these islands. And there's no way it's not connected to our meddling, and there's no way it's not connected to this imperialist past, right? So complications for sure, but what does this victory say about America? Now we are a huge ranking imperial power. This is it. So the Mexican-American War may have gotten us that land in the continental United States, but now we have these spheres of influence all over the globe. We are one of the big boys. We are just like those countries in Europe. We are now a ranking imperial power, so keep that in mind. Also, we have a lot more bases for trade and for these coaling stations. So that means we have more opportunity to then springboard off of those to get more spots. So this is going to be more wealth, more opportunity. And this, makes us an empire builder. Some people like Mark Twain said this is despicable. Why are we doing this? We're going to see the Anti-Imperialist League, William Jennings Bryan, these guys say no. Other people are going to say, yeah, this is what we have to do at this time. So when we talk about what to do with the Philippines, that's where you and I are going to pick up next. Do we annex the Philippines? Do we not? What do we do with Cuba? What do we do with the Teller Amendment that we wrote? What do we do with all of these holdings that we now got? And of course, it's a really complicated history, and a lot of it's reflected today in the present in these places. And wouldn't it be nice with the snow outside to be in Cuba, to be in the Philippines? It would be. All right, you guys, take care. I hope you have a great spring break.